Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Madeleine, hello. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This is going to be great. So I'd like to start off for my listeners who are not familiar with you. Please let me know how you describe yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Madeleine Henry, and I'm the author of Breathe In, Cash Out, a novel, which comes out in July. That is my profession.
Oh, wonderful. Perfect. And we'll get to your book in a little bit. But before we get into that, I want to ask a little bit about your background. So you originally studied psychology at Yale.
I did. That was my official major. Yes.
Yeah. What was that like? And why did you choose psychology?
Oh, well, interestingly, I entered college wanting to be a doctor. And I quickly found that I did not like hard science classes. And so it was a slow slide into soft science, which was psychology. And I felt like I was studying the maps of humans, like what made us work exactly. And I was like looking into the machine. And I found that really fascinating. And what's not shown in my official major is I took a bunch of advanced writing classes. So I was psychology with some hard science at the beginning, and then ultimately I ended up in English. So
okay, excellent. So what was it that made you want to study writing?
I think that it's more a reflection of what I was doing naturally than any decision to do it. And so, I've always been a writer, and I think that started with very young when I was gifted a typewriter. And so I was in this room as a kid. I grew up in the suburbs, and it was really my form of recreation was just to make stuff up on this machine. And it stuck with me as a hobby. And then I started to take it more seriously as I was nearing the end of college and thinking, oh, well, what am I going to do with my life? And so I took 2 advanced tutorials each semester's senior year. And in each one, I wrote a novel. And nothing ever happened with those. But I kept writing even as I went into finance. And then now I have my first book coming out in July. And I actually just sold my second book, which is going to come out next year or the year after. So I'm a full-fledged writer now.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So let's jump into what you did after college.
Okay.
So why finance?
Yeah. So that I can put into context for you as a social phenomenon. And it's really for people in Ivy League schools who don't know what they want to do typically end up in finance or consulting. And so I read the stat that in 2017, 40% of Harvard grads went into finance or consulting. And so that gives you an idea of how common this is. And the banks and the consulting firms really make it easy because they come to us on campus toward the end of college. They interview us. And you don't need any specific skill set to get these jobs because you're given training for 4 to 6 weeks after you're hired. And so it's really just how well can you play this interview game in order to get the job. And the jobs are viewed as extremely prestigious, and you're viewed as successful if you get one. And something that I think is that when you're young, the conventional metric for success is grades in school. And as you get older, it's money to a certain extent. And so if you're an Ivy League student and you've been playing that game, then a very easy extension of it is to just continue into finance or consulting where all your friends were going. So I didn't have a book deal as a senior, and I wasn't going to go into psychology. and I was familiar with finance because my dad is in finance. I know people in finance. So it was that's how I ended up in that profession to start.
Okay. So you then were hired by Goldman Sachs, moved to New York.
Yes.
So what was it like working for Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, so I can speak about that very generally in what the common investment and banking experience is. And in general, it's very grueling in that work becomes basically all that you do. Physically, it's very challenging in the sense that you're sedentary. Your schedule is completely out of your control because it's essentially like being an on-call doctor all the time as an investment banker because you're never sure when you're going to get work. Your weekends are unprotected. And so that was the general investment banking experience, which is captured truthfully in my new book, which comes out in July.
Sure. So after Goldman Sachs, then you still continued in the investment banking world because you jumped over then to Ziff Capital Partners. Why did you then decide to leave Goldman, which may be in your book, and then jump to the next challenge?
Yeah. So at that point, I still had not discovered what I specifically wanted to do. And if you're following the conventional path in investment banking, then after 1 to 2 years, you will exit into investing. And so that's still going with the flow, looking around, seeing what your peers are doing. And when you're a banker, you don't have enough avocation time to invest in passions or hobbies. So you're still going with the flow. And so I ended up on the buy side in investing. And it was only there that I had enough time outside of work to really invest time in what I love to do, that I grew into those interests professionally. Okay.
And so with your book, it's, it talks about your love of yoga and this whole journey.
Love of yoga. I know it's difficult because I share similarities with this character, but it's not a memoir. It's
Okay, good. Well, so that's what I was going to get into then. So during your journey, sometime in this, you decided that this is the book you wanted to write. So what was So it's great. So it's not a memoir. It's not necessarily you, but I'm sure it's probably based off of just some things that were happening around you. What made you want to decide this book at this time?
Interesting. So I think that I found the investment banking world fascinating, and I knew that a lot of people probably would too. And so it was a mix of where I had experience and knowledge to draw from to create a world, and the intersection of that with what I thought other people would be interested in, because it is a bit of an elite experience, and people tend to like to lift the veil up on elite experiences. So that was the genesis of the idea.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, so let's then jump into this then. What was the process like of actually writing this book? Because were you still at the investment practice when you were writing it? Did you write it like in the evenings, in the mornings? What was your general setup with this when you were getting into it?
Yeah, so I would say that most of my free time while I was in the investing world was devoted to writing this book. Okay. And so I was also learning yoga at this time, which is another part of my life. And so those are my two big interests, were writing this book and practicing yoga. And I would write in the mornings usually, because I think we all have our different productivity strike zones, and mine happens to be first thing in the morning. Sure. So I would get up very early, I would work on this, and I would spend weekends on it as well. So that's half the time.
Okay, excellent. And what was it about so actually, let's take this back. Your project is coming out through Simon & Schuster. What was that process like of having a traditional book publishing deal done? Did you write your manuscript ahead of time and then go through the process, or what was that type of situation like?
So the first step in going from idea to finished book was getting an agent. And so what I did was I did very old-fashioned queries to agents. So I sent out, hey, like, this is my pitch for my book. This is who I am. And I was lucky that I had a lot of agents interested, actually, just because I think that the fact that I was writing a novel that took place in an investment bank and that I worked at Goldman Sachs, agents saw that and they thought, wow, this is super commercial. And so I had agents interested. And then I ended up working with William Morris Endeavor. And, so with my agent there, we did some revisions, and then I ended up selling the book last summer, and now it's coming out this summer.
Okay. Wonderful. So at the same time, you said you were getting into yoga and you were building your yoga platform.
Exactly. Yeah.
What was that like? And did that help with the journey to have this book published?
I think so. I think that, first of all, the book itself is about an investment banker who wants to be a yogi and is trying to reconcile these two worlds, which, if you have any exposure to those worlds, you'll find it hilarious because they're essentially opposites. Finance is all about power and money and external rewards, and yoga is all about humility and internal rewards. And so to try and do both at the same time is very difficult, as my character discovers. And so, yes, the yoga helped me write this book because it gave me experiences to draw on, to put into it. And also, I was building an Instagram platform. I share my yoga practice on Madeleine Henry Yoga on Instagram. And so I was doing that as well. And that put me in touch with now people who are going to read the book. So.
Oh, perfect. So I want to ask a little bit about your actual journey of this. There has to be some elements of being uncertain about, your decisions and
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you approach times when you're uncertain, you're maybe fearful, and just, have the strength to just push through and go for it?
Yeah. So for that, I come back to, without sounding hokey, mantra. Okay. So
sure.
I believe that if you are certain of something with your intuition, then you should follow it. And so I was really certain with my intuition that this is what I wanted to be doing. And so I left the finance world before I had signed this book contract. So it was out to publishers, and I had this intuitive certainty that I really believed in what I was doing, and I wanted to give it the full benefit of my full effort. And so I took that leap out of the finance world onto this publishing journey. And I think that you have to be in touch with yourself and know what's important to you and come back to that in times of uncertainty, because it's always challenging. But if you have that rock inside, then you come back to, okay, I've already committed to doing this. I feel that it's right. And then that becomes your check.
What advice would you give to someone listening to this podcast and thinking, I'm inspired by your journey because you're able to choose your own path and do what you ultimately felt you needed to that was inside of you. What kind of advice would you give them on first off, how to find that, but also to carve out enough time to be able to allow that to grow and not just get bogged down by the day-to-day?
Yeah, so it's obviously extremely difficult to carve out time for non-money making things when you're really bogged down at work. Like, that's extremely difficult. But I was lucky in the sense that I found my work very uncreative, and I need to be creative to be a happy human being. And I think that is something I see in my peers and friends too. I have people who work in finance, or I know people who work in finance who are painters. And they find avenues to express themselves outside of work. And so for me, mine was writing and yoga. And so yes, it was difficult to find the time, but it was so rewarding to me personally that it was worth it. So, but my advice would be to whatever you're trying to do, if you're trying to turn a hobby into a profession, I think the first step is to do it every day. and to not wait until you're inspired to try and make progress. And so for me, I was writing and doing yoga every day.